call before, have we? Right, so apologies for absence, please.
Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Bridgman, Deacon Loveridge, Dr Mahoney and Sparling, and we have Councillor MacDonald today subbing for Councillor Sparling.
I think I'm very disappointed that we've got so many people put apologies in and no substitutes for them. And Councillor James, I think I'm going to need to send a message to your Chief Whip and say, can we see if we can get that sorted, please? It doesn't reflect well on the gravitas of scrutiny. Thank you. Declarations of interest in regards to today's agenda, please. Thank you. Chair's urgent business, there's none that I'm aware of. No. The minutes from the meeting are held on the 9th of August. Whilst we don't have to technically sort of correct them or anything like that, but you're quite happy with them? You agree with them? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so the main thrust of today's meeting is establishing a strategic partnership with Torbay Council to deliver children's services. Now we have a fine array of officers and cabinet members. Welcome everybody, especially leader, chief exec and cabinet member, and Carol. Well, as I say, a wider range. So, who's going to kick off?
I think I'm going to start. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your welcome. Why are we here? Well, I think members have a fairly good grasp, but we've had some group briefings and we have a cross-party members working group set up. So I think we understand. But I mean, basically, we're here as a result of an invitation to us to engage in a process at the behest of the Children's Commissioner in Torbay around how we might take forward the whole issue of delivery of children's services in Torbay. I think members are fully aware of the difficulties that have been ongoing in Torbay since I think 2011, if my memory is right, and the Commissioner and the DFE are keen to see a more robust arrangement in place that will lead to a sustained improvement in the delivery of children's services. So I think that's absolutely clear. Perhaps if I can ask Alison to just provide the little bit of background, because I suspect, and rightly, we might want to use the time available to look more towards the future and how and if and when we take this forward rather than a look into the past. But I think it's perhaps important just to set the context.
Okay, so the issues for Torbay Children's Services essentially date back to 2010 when their Ofsted inspection in relation to looked after children and safeguarding found them to be inadequate. They then were in a position that they did make some improvements and were re-inspected in 2013. And at that point, the judgments were made in a particular way and they were found to be adequate. Ofsted then did their single inspection framework inspection at the end of 2015 with a report in January 2016 which found them to be inadequate again. And the arrangements now are that if an authority is found to be inadequate in its provision of its children's social care services, and it's probably just worth remembering that the judgment is about their children's social care services, not about their educational schools, and actually their schools perform well. So bear that in mind when we think about what any potential partnership means. When an authority is found to be inadequate, then the Department of Education now appoints a Children's Commissioner to work alongside any authority that has been found to be failing its children. And the then Director of Children's Services in Hampshire, John Coughlin was appointed as Torbay's Children's Commissioner. And as well as assisting Torbay in their improvement, one of the roles of the Commissioner is to make a judgment about the rate of improvement and how improvement can be sustained. And in the context of the history I've described, I think that by the end of last year and early this year, it was clear to the Children's Commissioner that he could not recommend to the Department of Education that Torbay on their own would be able to sustain improvements. There are a number of other things that come into play in terms of how the rate of improvement is monitored, and I won't go into that detail now. But at that point, earlier this year, the Children's Commissioner's view was that it was very unlikely that Torbay would be able to sustain their change alone, and so started to consider alternative options. One option, and this has taken place elsewhere, is that Children's Trust is formed, and other options include working with a partner in the local area to set up it's called a strategic partnership for the delivery of Torbay's services. And so the Children's Commissioner approached neighbouring and local authorities to consider whether they would be interested in that approach. And Plymouth, along with other authorities, did put themselves forward, and he and his senior staff and senior interim staff in Torbay then reviewed the proposed possible partners, and has made a recommendation as a result of quite a rigorous process that for a number of reasons there is a good fit with Plymouth, that they are convinced about the rate of improvement and the stability of senior leadership in Plymouth that makes us a good fit in terms of looking at a strategic partnership. And so has made a recommendation that that's Plymouth. And I think from our point of view, we think that there is a way of entering that partnership that will not impact on the delivery of our services other than for there to be benefits as we go forward. And so it's in that context that the recommendation has been made, and that we're here today in terms of the recommendations.
Anybody else wish to speak? Tracy?
I think it might be helpful just to clarify that in its essence what this is a contractual arrangement with Torbay Council, and it's a contractual arrangement to run children's services on their behalf, and that means senior management being shared. And in any contractual arrangements, there are responsibilities on both parties to fulfil those obligations. And within the paper that you've got before you is an outline agreement in principle that covers some of the key elements of that. So Torbay would retain their responsibilities in all respects in relation to children, their statutory responsibilities, and maintain and retain the responsibility to fund children's services appropriately. What Plymouth City Council would be doing is providing the expertise from a management and officer perspective to ensure the delivery of children's services. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification.
Leader?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just also add to the point that Tracy's made, which I think is important. All other aspects, and members quite rightly will want to investigate and test how other things happen. But in terms of the sort of political arrangements, the political arrangements in Torbay will remain in Torbay, and the political arrangements that we have here in Plymouth clearly will do likewise. There is no intention or suggestion that anything along those lines should change. This is I think, as the Chief Executive has pointed out, this is essentially a contractual arrangement or proposal that we are considering entering into, having taken into account that clearly there are risks involved. There are risks involved in doing anything, and we have to we have to take note of those, and we have to potentially go through a period of due diligence before we are even in a position to actually sign up to it. So this is a two-stage process as we see it at this moment in time. I think it's important just to understand that.
Anybody else wish to set the scene? No? Okay. Well, the floor is ours then. So, you've got them. Yeah, Councillor, you first, is it? I see.
I got myself down.
All right, Councillor James first then. Then Councillor MacDonald, then Councillor Dan.
Thank you, Chair. I know we're wanting to agree this in principle. And in principle, when I first read about this, I thought that's a good thing to do, because we have to protect children, especially vulnerable children, no matter where they are, as far as I'm concerned. And if we were a council which was graded excellent or even good, I can understand us doing this in principle then. But we're not. In 2015, our children's services were judged as receiving improvement. We needed improvement, particularly around services for children in need of help and protection, and looked after children and care leavers. I know we've improved since then, and that's thankfully to our director, Carol Burgoyne, who has given us good leadership and good working practices, which is something Torbay hasn't got and which we could help them with. But my concerns really are whether this council has sufficient capacity and capabilities of doing this at all levels, and whether, God forbid, if there was any incident, who would be responsible for that incident? If there was a case review, a serious case review, who would take that responsibility? And I'm a bit concerned about our staff having to do that if it was in Torbay or get involved with it. There's mentioned about redeployment of managers' staff to Torbay and vice versa. And that could, in my opinion, have some adverse consequences, particularly around putting staff under pressure. And the last thing we want is our staff to be put under pressure, because pressure leads to work-related stress, and that's the last thing we want to do. So I think my main question really is, do we have sufficient capacity and capabilities at all levels, and that staff are not overstretched?
Thank you, Councillor James. I'll start, and I'm sure you'll find that during the course of the questions, we'll probably hand the microphone up and down the line and add to it. I'll probably start at your question around capacity, first of all, I'd like to tackle. I think the job of both your political leadership and managerial leadership is to make sure that we have an assessment and make sure we put in place the correct capacity we need to deliver. You've talked about leadership capacity, first of all, and so it's going to be absolutely critical that we make the right assessment about what the leadership capacity will be needed in Plymouth while we're doing this, and in Torbay whilst they're on their improvement journey. And we will have to make sure we enhance, probably in both places, that leadership capacity to ensure that we're able to deliver. Second bit is around then, what do you do at all the different levels around your capacity? And the experience that we now have from moving from being in our Ofsted inspection in 2015, where, as you say, we will require improvement, we've done a complete root and branch look at the whole department. Alison has led that, and I'll get her to talk a bit about it. Part of that is to make sure that you actually have the right people in the right place. You have enough of the right social workers, you have enough of the right team managers, you put the right training in place, you do all of the things that you need to do to deliver the service. So I would say to you, we've got to do those two things. We've got to make sure we've got the right leadership in both places, but we've also got to make sure we've got the right capacity right the way across the service. And finally, what you've got to have in place is you've got to have all the right processes. And one of the things Alison's led for us is to make sure that following the Ofsted inspection, we knew where we were doing well, but we knew we had some places to improve. What Alison's led is the programme to look at the areas we needed to improve on our processes. What what we will have to do is exactly the same if we go into Torbay and look at where are their processes now and where are the improvements and where is it that we can do something different that will help. I'd just like to ask Alison to add a bit about what we've done around increasing capacity.
So in terms of the improvements and the capacity, we have, as Carol described, done a root and branches review of the service, and we had a transformation programme which involved a complete end-to-end review. It was informed by work we were already doing to improve in a number of areas. And if I give you one example, in terms of the need to improve help children in need of help and protection, one of the areas that Ofsted had concerns about were the number of contacts that that then Advice and Assessment Service were dealing with, and that we had qualified staff dealing with a number of inappropriate contacts. And actually, that was one of the places we started early, and our review of our processes and our capacity meant that we established what we term the gateway, and actually that has diverted between 50 and 60% consistently of our contacts to staff who were previously doing other things. So that's one example. But actually our end-to-end review was implemented at the end of the changes as a result were implemented at the end of last year. We're now reviewing those changes. We are adjusting as we go. And I think the other thing I'd want to assure you about is that whilst we are satisfied we have things in the right place and we do have the right capacity, recruitment and retention is an ongoing challenge. We do very well. But also that I think when we think about capacity here and think about capacity in Torbay, there is going forward with any partnership or contractual arrangement, it would be clear that it would not be an arrangement that meant if there were capacity issues in Torbay, the answer is for frontline staff or managers to move across to assist with those capacity issues. The issue would be that senior management capacity here would be used to ensure that capacity was created in Torbay and issues were addressed in Torbay. So I hope that provides you with the answer to the two strands of what you were raising.
Yes. Thank you for that, Alison. I'm still concerned whether any of our staff would be overstretched on these contractual arrangements. And the last thing, as I said before, we don't want our staff being stressed. Can you relay my fears on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the, as I say, we do very well on recruitment and retention. I can't ever with confidence say that our workloads remain where we would want them to be. We do have points of pressure. However, we've done a huge amount of work to reduce the workloads across the service, and we have been successful in that. And our recruitment this year has been good, and we've got more qualified staff due to start over the next couple of months. And actually, one of the things we did as a result of implementing our transformation was look at our caseloads, and we were successful in making an investor safe case, and we've actually increased our capacity at social work level in the last year. So we are confident, and we would not see any implications for this partnership eroding the capacity we have and we've created and the work we're doing, and we would see benefits working across two authorities in terms of maintaining our recruitment and retention position.
Leader, you wanted to come in?
Just to make the point that Alison just finished up there, I mean, you can look at everything from a glass half full or a glass half empty scenario if you wish, and I think we should be looking at this in the most critical way, but I think there are clear opportunities for our staff in terms of development and career development and that sort of thing, working at scale that we're talking about. So I think it's perhaps not really quite balanced to sort of look at it in quite in a negative way. I mean, we've been very clear that there are two things here. There can be no adverse financial impact on Plymouth as a result of this arrangement, and Alison has explained how we would deal with that. But equally, there can be no detriment to children's services here in Plymouth. You know, we will all remember, those of us who have been here long enough, that you know, we've been in a dark place in 24, 5, 6, that sort of area around children's services and other issues. But you know, to our credit, and I'm not seeking to claim that credit, but to the credit of this council, we took a decision that we would get ourselves out of this hole, and we've done that, particularly around children's services, by working on a cross-party basis. That is always my intention as the leader of this council, that with this project in particular, it's absolutely critical that we do that. We cannot, I don't think, send out a correct and appropriate message to any potential body that we might want to either partner or contract with, if we can't show that, you know, we are clear here at this end about what is our intention. And I think there's also something around the fact that why was it that Plymouth came forward as the preferred option by the Commissioner, who's an acknowledged expert in children's services. And here we have the Chief Executive of Hampshire, in this case, the expert in the field, taking a view about what is the right way forward, and coming up with Plymouth. So, you know, I think there's a message there that there's a recognition that we do have a level of capacity and capability, and we have been able to move forward in terms of that improvement journey on children's services, which again has been done on a cross-party basis.
Thank you. Can I just sort of pin this down a little bit? I think certainly we've been concerned about whether it's a partnership or a contract. So who is contracted by whom to deliver what? And what might the contract monitoring arrangements be? And who will it be monitored by? And if we, as Plymouth City Council, need to exit the contract for whatever reason, how could that be achieved?
So the contract, I think I've said in a previous discussion with some of you that the initial direction comes from the DFE to Torbay. They direct them in terms of what has to happen. Then the arrangement is between Plymouth City Council and Torbay Council. There will need to be a monitoring arrangement put in place. One of the proposals is that either the chief executive of this authority or her nominated representative can potentially chair that contract meeting. Clearly, there will need to be political oversight in terms of how we manage those contract arrangements, both within Plymouth and Torbay. That needs to be worked out. I suspect, in terms of what Scrutiny will want to see following any discussion at Council, when we come back to you, if Council agree in principle for us to continue, that it is that sort of thing you will want us to come and demonstrate in detail to you, what the contract monitoring arrangements would be, what would go into the contract, the level of information that you would expect to see in a scrutiny meeting that would give you the assurance that the things we need to put in place are there. Clearly, what link back to your previous question from Councillor James about capacity, we've talked quite a lot about leadership and capacity in the department. To do this piece of work, you actually need capacity in the wider council. We happen to have David and Alison with us today from two of our corporate departments. When you get into the contractual arrangements, clearly the team that are around us will help us come to you and say, these are all the things we need to think about when you're in a contractual arrangement. But we're absolutely clear from the advice we've got, it will be a contractual arrangement. That's what it is. It's between us and Torbay, and how we develop, you've got the heads of terms, how we develop all of those arrangements, we will be doing in the detail following the in principle discussion at Council and any decision you might make.
Okay. Yes, certainly.
I know I've pushed you in front of Councillor MacDonald here, but as we're on this question about partnership and contractual arrangement, because it's something that I've raised at every single briefing, and although I am listening very carefully to what you say, I am still not at all happy with the language in the briefing paper, in the report, or the prospectus that went to Torbay Council. There is a difference between using the word partnership, which is what you've put in here, because that sounds as though you're working hand in hand together, which we will be in the delivery, but we are not a partnership. We will be very clearly I don't want to use the word commercial, but we will be a delivery partner, which is very, very different politically to being in a partnership. Now, I have not met any of the political members at Torbay Council, but if they're signing up for this, and which they have to because they are being directed to do so, in all fairness, the members don't have a lot of political choice. But it's very different signing up to what is perceived to be a partnership between two local authorities to deliver a contract and us being a delivery partner. Now, I know you're telling me that there's contractual arrangements. I hear all of that, but I think we need to stop talking about partnerships right now and be a delivery partner. So if you're in the big wide world over there, and if some horrible, big company wanted to come in and deliver children's services for Torbay, rather than keeping it in good local authority control, where we know we can do a good job, then they would not go into a partnership. They would be a hard-nosed, contractual delivery partner with set targets, measurements, and everything that can be monitored. This is not a political arrangement. This is a contractual arrangement, and we need to start using that language in all of the reports that we go out, because as politicians, we are responsible. We all sit here responsible for the safety and the welfare of children in Plymouth. I don't want to be responsible for the safety and the welfare of the children in Torbay politically, even though we all care. That is the job of the Torbay councillors, and they should hold that contractual arrangement to account, and we should hold the performance of that contractual arrangement to ensure that it has no detrimental effect in Plymouth. And I really do think we need to change the language of the report.
I wouldn't disagree with anything you've just said, Sue. Clearly, I've tried to listen to the views that have come back to the table from you and your colleagues, and one of which has been this particular point, and I'm perfectly happy to accept that henceforth we should describe this as a contract in the way that you've just described it. Forgive me, if you will, in that some of the reports that have been published have not caught up with the dialogue that's been going on in the last few days, but henceforth we will obviously continue now to describe it as a contract, and that point's been made to colleagues in Torbay who understand that entirely. They accept they have to take political responsibility for children's services in Torbay in the same way as we do here in Plymouth.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Sue MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that piece of linguistics has been cleared up. I have another one, actually. I've been reading, only this morning, to my shame, Torbay Council, the meeting of Torbay Council on the 20th of July. And this is the Children's Services delivery model. And I refer to page 159. I appreciate you having it in front of you. But I'm sure you've been looking at what Torbay have been publishing in the public domain now, actually. Paragraph 2.23 of that document. And I will quote, Plymouth City Council have also indicated their willingness to consider joint delivery of all services, both Tier 1 and Tier 2, Therefore, there are wider implications that must be considered. Now, that's one hell of a typo if it's not correct. And my question, therefore, Chair, is to the leader of the council about this Tier 1 and Tier 2 and Plymouth's willingness to deliver.
We've always made it clear to Torbay that the initial emphasis of all our work was and is and will continue to be children's services. That's the driver here. Torbay have been undertaking a piece of work to understand what is the nature of their future delivery model going forward, given that the current governance model with the elected mayor comes to an end in April 19. So they have to come up with a future governance model to succeed that. They certainly asked us for our view around whether we would be up for a discussion around other subject areas, and we've made it clear to them that as and when that case came forward, clearly we wouldn't ignore them, we would listen, but we're making absolutely no commitment around any future delivery of any other services at this moment in time. Torbay have now had a report from local partnerships around what the alternative models of governance might be, and they are looking at that now and will take a decision on the 27th of September. My call to them, and I think we've made this crystal clear, is that until they in turn are crystal clear about what is their governance model over the next 5 years, then we will not be able to take forward children's services or indeed anything else until we have complete clarity about what Torbay's future arrangements might look like. And that's been made absolutely clear to them, and I can do no more than say that, and we will share obviously that with them, but it's been made clear to them that if they don't make a decision, the problem is we need a decision, we need clarity, and if that's not forthcoming on the 27th, then that will cause us to put our foot on the ball and just look and see where we are. All right. In other words, we wouldn't want to move forward into the due diligence stage of this process until we had complete clarity and satisfaction that we clearly understood what the nature of that governance model might be.
Chair, just a supplementary, as the minutes read in the public domain, the people of Torbay could be forgiven for thinking we're very willing to take over more than children's services, because it gives no indication of the timescales that you have indicated here. So it seems there's a kind of time warp going on somewhere in relation to this. And in terms of it dovetailing over a 5-year period, perhaps in order to put services correctly, there could be that implication cutting in at a later point in it as we travel along this road, and that needs to be prepared for, and we need some clarity at the earliest opportunity. I appreciate Torbay's council meeting was delayed. However, I do think we need to seek clarity as soon as possible on that statement, because the people of Torbay are thinking, they could be forgiven for thinking, that it's not just children's services, it's everything else that Plymouth are willing to take over. That may lead to a politically hostile environment and doesn't augur well for the first few significant steps forward in this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
All I can say to you is that the only issue in scope is children's services at this moment in time. We've given no undertaking whatsoever about any other services.
Can I just have a quick point, Chair, if I may? We have PERDA coming along, and this process is hurtling along where we need clarity and decisions. And I absolutely agree on the contract stuff. I think that's a significant step forward for us collectively. If we have PERDA, decision-making of this magnitude stops. I, for example, couldn't sign off a children's early intervention for mental health in schools because it was PERDA, despite being part of the attending commissioning session along with the children. I was stopped from doing that, quite rightly, because of it. So how do we manage this with the now constricted timescale?
the time frame as the current trajectory that we're on, if everything goes without any further hitch, is that I would hope that we could agree on Monday to an in-principle decision. That would then take that forward to next Wednesday, when I'd be looking for complete clarity from Torbay in the way that I've described. That would trigger a period of due diligence, which I would anticipate we may be in a position by the end of the year to take a decision that we would proceed with the Children's Services proposal on a contractual basis. That would then lead into a period of mobilisation before an implementation date, and the earliest that I can reasonably see that would be appropriate to run would be probably April 18, all right? But, and I've made this very clear to Torbay, as indeed as the Chief Executive, that if there is any delay on Torbay's behalf in providing the clarity that we need, then that will impact on the April 18 implementation date. I hope that's clear.
Thank you. Councillor Tuffin.
Thank you, Chair. I know a lot of the detail will be fed into due diligence, but like Councillor James, at some point people are going to ask me, why are we doing this? We're responsible for Plymouth, and I understand their concerns. So if you'll forgive me, I will go into a bit of detail, because I think it's important that I can answer those questions. And one of those you've already raised, will we have the financial support for our officers if we have to make if we have to share with Torbay for operational requirements? And I think it's very important excuse me, that we emphasise that, and that we understand at this point. I think there's other elements. It occurred to me just recently, should at some time in the future this fail, before we go into it, I want assurances we will not lose financially. If we have to make people redundant, then that should be part of the agreement, not paid for by Plymouth taxpayers, but by Torbay taxpayers. So I think this is a good place for us to kind of feed into that due diligence. Another question would be that how locked in are we to our funding? For instance, we have an increased children's need at the moment. We've got more children than we've financed for. Now, I understand that's in the lap of the gods virtually. We could face that same scenario in Torbay. I need assurances that that will not be a cost to Plymouth. I also need assurances that Plymouth will be able to manage its own services if we have increased needs, which, given a political position, I think is likely to happen. So I think these things need to, for our benefit, need perhaps to be questioned and answered before due diligence, because I know the further down the road we get with this, I mean, I'm in favour of looking after young people and children, believe you me, but I know the further we get down the road with this situation, the harder it's going to be to say no or to be negative. And, I'm totally supportive of councils helping other councils. That's the way it should be, because we're the experts. We've done it. We know what it's like at the coalface. So I totally support that. But I have these concerns that I have to knock on doors and explain to people what's in it for Plymouth. And we haven't got those answers. So the details are important, and I think we probably need them a little bit earlier than due diligence.
JC.
Me to kick off on that one. I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Tuffett. It's absolutely essential that we understand the full business case here, because again, in terms of contractual terms, you don't enter into an arrangement unless you're very, very clear on the benefits. What we're seeking at the moment is an in principle decision, the green light, to work up the detail. And I think all the questions that you're raising are very valid in us bringing back as part of that detail before you make a final decision. That's really essential. So everything you're saying is perfectly reasonable for us to explore and to be able to satisfy you or not satisfy you, in which case you'll make a decision one way or the other around whether to proceed or not. What we have done in the report, in section, it's actually on page, I'm just looking, page of the pack, 14 and 15, are at this stage what we see to be the risks and the potential benefits of the arrangement. Now, they are quite wide-ranging, both in terms of risks and in terms of benefits. And what it's going to be important for us to do, if you give us the green light, is to work in detail, work those up, and there might be some of those there that we say, no, that's really not a benefit at all. And there might be others that we're working up that we're saying, yes, we can see this, we can now see this and bring forward more detail to you about those benefits. And by the same token, the risks that are identified there. The leader of the council has identified, I think, what we consider to be the biggest risk. And I think you've given us a very clear direction of travel, which is that if Torbay feel that their long-term delivery arrangements lie with another partner, then the children's services proposition would fall away, because the complexity of providing children's services with another partner that's providing other upper tier services does overcomplicate an area that is complex enough. And particularly the point there is that one of the benefits that we think we bring as a player, as a contractor in this field, is the work that we do on integrated commissioning. We have a very strong, renowned service that provides integrated commissioning. So we can see that there may be benefits in there that will need to be explored. But from our perspective, some of the benefits around integrated commissioning we think are worth exploring. And I'm sure Carol or Alison might want to pick that up in a little bit more detail.
Can I just say that I think the risk register is essential for us. I know we sort of nag on about risk registers from this committee, but to me that's got to be, central to this, and obviously working out where it's best to monitor the performance along with that risk register. So I just want to hold that for the moment. Did you want to come back on that, anything there, Ian, or are you happy?
No, I'm just I just feel happier when I know these issues are highlighted. I know we've raised them in the past at briefings, but I think it's important that we keep a good collection of these items, so that when the time comes, when we make our mind up, we've got all the information available. Thank you.
Chair,
Yes.
can I just for clarity, and I absolutely understand Ian's concerns there. I mean, it clearly would be our intention to maintain the cross-party working group that will go into the detail of this. Clearly, we will keep scrutiny in the picture as well as every other member of the council. This is just too important a subject to get wrong. We've got to get it right if we choose to do it. But I mean, what I'm saying is that up until the point when we sign up to the contract, then this agenda is and will remain within the control of individual members acting collectively as the council. So it will be our collective call to either go or not go. All right.
Thank you. Sudan?
I suppose I'm going to come back to looking at the risks again. And they are areas that we've sort of covered in the briefing, but I think it's still pertinent to raise it. So the contract that Hampshire County Council have got with the Isle of Wight, in terms of a scrutiny process, I always like to know what I'm scrutinising. We know nothing about that contract. We don't know how it works. We don't know how it's been managed. We don't know what the positive outcomes have been. We don't know what they would do better. And I think from from a decision-making process, if that is the baseline, if that is the benchmark of the contract that we're looking to replicate, we need to understand that more. Just by understanding that, it'll give us more of an idea then of the political and non-political aspects of running such a vital service for another authority. So I think that's an area that we need to be very, very much aware of, because what would they do differently? What are we going to learn from that? So that's one. I think the whole thing about the strategic direction of Torbay Council is absolutely key as well, because when we're delivering children's services in Plymouth, you've just talked about our integrated commission. We're not just delivering it in a box. We're so reliant on other services to support children's services. So the need in all reports, so whether it's in Torbay or Plymouth, I think we need to have another box on that report which says what the impact of the decision that you're just about to take is going to have. So it could be then on the, when we're bringing decisions to deliver a contract to Scrutiny to have a look at, we can see what the impact's going to be on our internal delivery of children's social services, which picks up the capacity and the transition and the funding, because that will be on all of it, but also in Torbay. So if they're making a decision somewhere left field, what is the impact is that going to have on children's services? Because you can have an integrated commissioning model, but unless you've got that service delivery control over it, I can see in the future there's going to be conflicting arguments within the political arena about how money is spent. So I was very reassured, Ian, to hear you say that, you know, should Torbay choose to have a strategic partner for delivery of all other services, then that could be a red line in terms of our delivery for children's services.
It's not could be, it would be.
It would be, yeah.
There is no issue there. So if that's their choice, and again, I've made it very clear, and Chief Executive likewise, that Torbay are autonomous here. They can make whatever choice they want, and whatever they do, we will respect that. We're not going to fall out. They'll go whatever they want to do. But it has to be their choice, and they have to be clear. That's the two critical factors here. So I don't know anyone else would want to pick up any of the points. I mean, Isle of Wight. We've spoken to the commissioner, and I think you've been. Yeah. Any thoughts around
So
that?
if I do a
Can I
few and
just
then...
remind you, one button on at a time. We have 3 on then, so can we just... I don't know, but Sue had hers on while you were speaking, so can I just ask you just to double check that only one button is on, please?
So, absolutely right that we need to understand what's going on in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. It's really helpful. A small group of us actually went to Hampshire yesterday to have a look at some of the work they've done, but also for people like David and our programme manager for I8 for Integrated Health and Wellbeing to have the opportunity to talk to the people in Hampshire that had done similar work so that we could get a bit of an insight. So we are particularly interested. So I think there's 2 different aspects of this. One aspect is the bit that Alison's probably focusing on the most, which is about how do you make sure you focus on the improvements that are needed in children's services. So the targets that we would be looking at and what you're actually doing to make sure the services are delivering. There's another set of information that we want to look at, which is really in David's world and other support people, where we're looking at what is the finance, how do you ensure that you keep the money separate, how do we get the right support from the Department for Education to set it up. And I'll let David answer some of those questions. How you get the right legal support if you're going to write a clear contract that is going to have all the measurables in it, what we make sure we have in place around performance management. David's been over it. You will know from Scrutiny that we have really good cost and volume information in Plymouth. One of the things we want to check and get into a bit more detail, and David will go off and do that once we've got the in-principle decision, is how do we make sure that the material we use on a regular basis is the material that's also used in Torbay, because that will help us in how we report back on that monitoring, that we're satisfied that the targets we're trying to reach are the ones that we should be focusing on. So we're on, we're in quite an exploratory phase ourselves at the moment, where we're having to learn some of the stuff that Hampshire and Isle of Wight have done, and I'll let colleagues join in on that, but also to make sure that we understand how Torbay operate. And until we really get that in principle from all of you, that yes, you want us to go further, we're doing just enough at the moment, if that makes sense, because we don't want to be putting, as you've said, a lot of our capacity into Torbay until we know actually we're going to get some money from the DFE, we are in a position to put some capacity in place, and then we can really motor on it. We know all the things we want to look at, but then we can motor. And I'm going to ask David, do you want to add some bits about due diligence, finance, and some of the things you have picked up?
Thank you, Chair. One of the most interesting things I think I picked up yesterday was Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are 3 years into their arrangement. And I said, is there any blurring of the finances? And anyone I spoke to were absolutely clear. There is an Isle of Wight set of accounts, and there's a Hampshire, and there is no mixing whatsoever. So over those 3 years, there's never been any occasion, and there never will be, where if a problem pops up in either organisation, they look to cross-fertilise. So that is absolutely clear, and I think we have been clear right from the start with the DFE and with the leader and the chief exec that this will not impact on the finances of Plymouth City Council. It will not cost us. Now, Carol's absolutely right. I've already gone into Torbay to have the initial conversation just to sort of warm the finance department up to the fact that we do want to come in, and I've made it very clear it's wider than just looking at the numbers around children's, because I think I've said in previous meetings, if you just took the children's element of Plymouth City Council's budgets and MTFS, it wouldn't give you the full story. It's no good if there's no funding coming in or if someone else is overspending on the other side. So I've got to understand the full picture. But also, it's very clear to me that, well, why are you asking all these questions? We haven't made a decision yet. So until we get past that hurdle, Carol and Tracy are absolutely right. There's no point going in and asking those questions. But that was sort of the focus that I had over the last couple of days up in Hampshire about how it was working from a financial point of view. And they are absolutely clear that there's been no impact and there will be no impact. And we've made that clear as well to Department for Education. And I'm probably going into too much detail, but I think there's kind of two distinct phases to what we're doing here. And even phase one probably, in my mind, breaks down to maybe A, B and C. So, been quite clear, whatever happens, whatever the decision is next week, we have put in lots of time, effort, travel, etc. from officers, members up to this point. So whatever happens, we need reimbursing for that. And we've got the agreement that that is the case. So that's kind of a 1A to me. 1B is the phase of due diligence and getting the contract put in place to get us to a go-live date, if it is the 1st of April. And then a 1C, and it's been a lot of negotiating on this one, is you don't switch off a project on go-live date. So we've said, you know, we've talked about the interim director of Children's Services not disappearing on the 31st of March and saying you need to be around at least until June because this will settle down. And therefore, DFE, there are ongoing costs. So there's kind of that three elements to the first phase. And then the second one, which I think is probably the most important, is how do we fund this going forward? And how do we make sure that this isn't costing Plymouth City Council any money? So that's the one that I was exploring over the last couple of days. And we can learn from the experience of what Hampshire have done in terms of how they've said, you know, we don't want to cost individual employees and put salaries and all that kind of thing. We came up with a more higher level, and they kind of come up with a 25% of cost. Now, we need to explore that because the ratios between us and the finances in Torbay are different, but that's the kind of detail that we need to be getting into. And I think, I just want to say, and I've said this before, I don't want to do this in isolation, and don't think that due diligence is just about finance. It's about our HR colleagues and all the contracts. It's about legal, of course, and what children's contracts there might be in place. So there's all that due diligence will be going on, but I absolutely want to come back and share it. I don't want to be taking the responsibility of saying everything's fine. I want to share everything and be open and transparent on that. So
the finance that we're expending now to get where we're going, are we going to be able to claim that back, or is that coming out of our budgets at the moment?
No, that was the first conversation with the DFE, that even just thinking about and planning for this will cost us money. So that was what I was sort of saying, phase 1A. So that agreement's on the table. So, yeah.
Can I just come back on one?
Sue, did you want to come back?
Well, I think also, as well as the transition and the ongoing costs, there's nothing in the risks about any exit costs as well. Because if you have to take on extra staff, who picks that up? So I'm just going to leave that there, just as a, it's got to be the whole thing. Because if it's going to be a 5-year contract, it costs just as much to leave it sometimes as it does to get in it.
Right, Councillor Beer. We've been quiet with you. Yeah. What conversations have you had with your counterpart in Torbay about all of this? And, sort of, what are they concentrated on, really?
Well, the answer to that, Councillor Aspinall, is I haven't met my counterpart in Torbay yet. I haven't been invited to do so. But I just want to reassure the panel here this morning that my due diligence is to Plymouth children and young people, particularly those vulnerable children in our communities. And I make sure I have regular meetings with all my officers, keeping a close eye on the finances and budgets of the children's services. And I will make sure that none of our money goes outside to Torbay. So that's my due diligence that I'm promising to abide by. I'm hoping that at some stage I will get an opportunity to meet with a cabinet member who I have met at other meetings, but we've never actually come together to discuss this.
Thank you for that.
Just quickly.
Yeah. Councillor James.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, in actual fact. You can't go any further until such times you get a full agreement, in principle, from full council. Yes. When that is done, and hopefully it will be done, when can Scrutiny expect to see some development on the contractual arrangements?
Perhaps I'll start and perhaps ask Carol or Alison. I mean, I can't give you a date, if I'm honest with you, David. I mean, we do need the green light on Monday, obviously, and that will then kick-start that process. I've indicated that, we would be aiming to try and get to a point, having done the due diligence, when we can come back with a firm recommendation supported by members, hopefully before the end of the year. So, it wouldn't be that long, obviously, before we would be able to bring back some initial thoughts and ideas around, how that contract might look. Because, what I would want to do is to ask Scrutiny and the cross-party working group, and indeed every member of council, to be clear as to what their expectations were. And we would need to try and, obviously would listen to that to see how we can meet those concerns and address those concerns within that contract. But as David said, we're all aware, this is a complex piece of work.
I asked a question because we have a work programme, obviously, to try and keep up. So we need to get that on the work programme. If not, we have to have an extraordinary meeting on this particular issue.
I think just to add to what the leader said, clearly if we are due to go to a future council meeting where you make your final decision, if it goes in principle on Monday, then there will be a timeline needed to be created. And it sounds to us as though what Scrutiny are saying at the moment is there are a number of things that you would quite like to be able to have a look at from an assurance point of view. And so it might be sensible if we were able to come to you first of all and say this is what an assurance framework would look like, and picking up all the areas that you've described, using people like David to populate the sorts of material and then come back with it completed, so that you can then reassure yourselves and provide feedback to either Cabinet and then on to Council about what your view is on the assurance that we've been able to. You're raising a number of risks, some of which we will have, but Councillor Dan's just brought another risk in that's probably not on the list, the one about an exit. So we're gathering things as we go. So I think if we were able to do that with you on at least one or two occasions, that would be helpful, I think, from everybody's point of view, to know that you were able to say you'd looked at it, and you could provide what your assurance were and what concerns you still had.
Councillor MacDonald.
I sort of lost track of the question for a minute. I understand about the finances being completely separate. I've also read Torbay's Ofsted report, and one of the reasons Plymouth was picked is because following our Ofsted report, I think it was the Minister, Robert Goodwill, was impressed by the Children's Commissioner by the Commissioner John Coughlin, that we had scale and pace in moving forward. I'd be interested to know, and I appreciate that Torbay is a struggling authority with this, some of the things in the Ofsted report have capital implications. So, for example, we talk a lot about bringing people over to help and keeping the finances separate. If on one of the Ofsted findings is the electronic recording system doesn't effectively support social work practice, nor does it provide sufficient performance management information, and they've recognised this, and it says they're being implemented. I think that question epitomises for me what we need now, I believe, at the appropriate point, is a state of the Torbay as is now, following an Ofsted report that's about a year ago. And I have some experience, I won't say bitter experience, of hastily implemented IT systems, and I'm not saying Torbay would do this, in the NHS, and links that didn't link to GPs and all kinds of things, the effects of which are felt to this day. So, and I also remember inheriting the Care First system for adult social care, and finding to my surprise it took absolutely no account of what benefits people might be receiving through central government, where, for example, mobility, and we might be giving a mobility allowance at the local level. All that is passed, but not without some pain to my successors. So, I do think that that's just one I've picked out to illustrate the point, and I wondered if that's at all possible, that we get that state of the art, as it were, or state of the nation of Torbay's children's services up to date, because I think that we'd actually see some scale and pace that they've done so far.
I think, Chair, that's one for Alison to put a bit more detail on.
Thank you.
So the process for any inadequate authority is that Ofsted themselves do repeat monitoring visits, which is one of the ways, and their letters are published after each monitoring visit. So I think I'm right that Torbay have had 3 of their 4 monitoring visits, and they've just had one, and they have another one due before the end of this year. So that's one way in which we are aware of the rate of progress. And there will be, they anticipate, once their monitoring visits are completed, Ofsted go back and do a full re-inspection, which they anticipate to be early next year. So that's the external state of the nation state. The Children's Commissioner chairs a Children's Improvement Board, which meets on a bi-monthly basis, and I would expect that as part of the due diligence, we will be updated on the rate of progress against each of the improvement areas. As far as that it's a multi-agency improvement board, and we will be seeing in detail the rate of progress. Okay, so that would be the way in which, and we have some of that information already, but I think, like everything we've discussed, for us to go into the detail of that at this point in advance of an in-principle decision, but we will get both internal and external triage on the state of and rate of progress and it will include ICT.
Thank you for that. It's of some comfort, because if the IT system doesn't work, it has a huge impact on the entire service, I would. So it was just, whilst it epitomises what I wanted to say, it also is quite an important bit of kit that needs to be in place.
Just something that somebody had asked me to clarify. I'm presuming that we've had some discussion with our staff and social workers about all of this, and just making sure that our frontline workers are really reassured that this is not going to impact on their caseloads, on their workload, etc. That it's that managerial support and mentoring, etc., that we're going to be given, that we're not going to find some poor soul coming in on a Monday morning and being said, oh, by the way, you need to go to Torquay today because of whatever. That, to me, would cause complete disarray, and it's a no-no from my perspective as to you know, our... And you've already said that, Councillor Beer, and I take that on board. But it's just that somebody had asked me to clarify that our staff know exactly what's going to be expected of them, or not, as the case may be, and that we have talked with them so that they're with us on this.
We have had communication with staff, and I know that in their team meetings they have been assured about that specific issue, that this does not mean that they will be asked to go and work elsewhere. However, again, in terms of any detailed discussions with them and their views, I think that for us that will start once we're clear the in-principle decision's been made, because it's a delicate balance, but yeah, and we will absolutely be involved in assuring them and seeking their views and their concerns as we go forward.
Right, team. Anybody else got any other questions? Councillor Dan.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to sort of the politics of the contract now. In the outline partnership arrangements, it makes very clear that the Plymouth City Council's Director of Children's Services will take full operational responsibility for both children's services. It also mentions that the executive member for Torbay will play a key role in the ongoing political responsibility for the delivery. I actually think we need to add in there the executive member for Plymouth as well, because this is very much pushing towards what the political governance in Torbay is, but actually the executive member, Councillor Beer, has got the equal responsibility to be closely monitoring to make sure there's no negative impact on the delivery of our children's services. Absolutely. So I know this is not a political decision in terms of its delivery, but in our delivery of our children's social services, we still have to make sure that we are politically responsible and accountable.
I'll start and then hand on. So the way it's been written has been written in that way because the role of a Director of Children's Services and the lead member's responsibilities, as many of you will know, is absolutely laid out in a document and is really clear what we're responsible for. So as you all know, I'm your statutory director, and it lays down exactly what that means. So this would mean that the Director of Children's Services, there would be a single statutory officer across the two. That's fairly easy in terms of roles and responsibilities. In terms of the lead member, and again, Councillor MacDonald will remember this from when Ofsted came. Yeah, there is an absolute laid out responsibility for your lead member. So Councillor Beer currently has that role and responsibility and is absolutely responsible for everything within Plymouth, and the opposite number in Torbay will be exactly the same. So what we can't do is separate out any of those statutory roles and responsibilities. But what there is absolutely no reason that we can't put something in place is around how the discussions happen about how both of them make sure they deliver their roles and responsibilities, and that there is no impact in one authority from what the other authority does.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the crucial bit. So what we cannot do is set up anything where Councillor Beer has any authority over the Torbay children's, and I know you know that, and I'm just being absolutely clear, especially as we're on webcast as well. There may be members of the public wanting to be clear about that. But there is absolutely every reason why Councillor Beer wants to understand that what we're doing in Torbay is not impacting on children in Plymouth. And I think that's at the crux of what you're saying to us, Councillor Dan. Is that right?
It is. I'm just saying that it makes it absolutely clear that executive member for Torbay has got their responsible and ongoing political responsibility for Torbay, but it doesn't have the same line for the Plymouth, and I think we need to have it in there because Councillor Beer's responsibility for monitoring the impact it might have on our delivery is an ongoing responsibility, and I think it needs to be spelt out equally, because I think it shows there then you've got that divide between the political responsibility for Torbay and the political responsibility for Plymouth.
I just want to say thank you for that, Councillor Dan, because I think it's most helpful. And that's what this process is all about this morning. You've picked up on a couple of points that we've now got to refocus on to make sure they're included in the contract. And I'm really grateful to you for highlighting that this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor James.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. If we agree at full council in principle to this contract going to arrange, and you're looking at the contract arrangements, will you ensure that there's an exit strategy within those contractual arrangements?
David, do you want to...
We have
Chair.
somebody?
I was just going to say, I think, yes, and absolutely picking up on the point made earlier about the cost of exit, but yes, we've already thought about, obviously, the exit and the strategy, but hopefully we don't have to put it in there, but it has to be in the contract. So yes, we'll take that on board.
Councillor MacDonald.
Chair, just two quick points. One, I do remember break clauses, which I suppose is quite usual in any contract, but I'd like the comfort of knowing that they're there. Although I do look positively on this because there are many opportunities for this council. The other thing, just in my mind, Alison's comments about the staff reassurance. We know that caseloads can be high at times, and we know from the budget papers where we are in terms of overspend. I'm sure there'll be delivery plans to put that right. However, I do think the message to the staff, the front line, does need to be strengthened rather. That you've heard what you've got. That people are being kept up to date. I do think that needs to be strengthened for the frontline social workers out there, particularly with high caseloads, and knowing that they're going to have to be part of delivery plans in addition to this. And I just think that extra bit of care and information to staff, not just as a comfort thing, but the clarity. Otherwise, people, maybe some people, not the social workers perhaps, because they're professionals, but some staff might be a bit perplexed by all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely assure you that once we are the other side of the in-principle decision, we will be ensuring an absolute emphasis on assuring our staff that there will be no impact for them, and recognising the position they're in terms of workloads.
Thank you, Chair. It is alluded to in point D, 6D of the recommendations, just a little bit of strengthening. Thank you.
Councillor Tui.
Thank you. I came here with a whole list of things I wanted to, and most, I have to say, and also with a feeling of deep unease, but a lot of this has been covered. But what has come across to me is the more we talk about it, how more the more complex it gets. We haven't even got the initial decision that'll be done next week. Where does the magic date of April come from? Because it seems very optimistic to me to think that this is actually going to be got together by that time. Maybe if everybody agrees, all get together, no slip-ups, IT or anything else, various things have come up this morning, we might possibly make it, but I have to say it does seem unlikely. Does it have to be April, or is there any leeway if even a small thing goes wrong?
Perhaps there's some irony with it being the 1st of April. You never know.
Oh.
So,
Lift that out.
Make it the
Leader, do you and Tracy, between you, want to answer this?
Well, I'll start, and I'm sure Alison or Carol might want to add. April has always been considered. The advice I've had from officers is that April is the earliest date upon which we could possibly contemplate actually going live with this contract, because we need to allow a period of time for mobilisation and all the stuff that needs to happen between the point where, if we choose, we decide to give the green light to the contract and we actually start to implement it. And as I said earlier, that will also be conditional upon having the right message and the right information from Torbay. And if that isn't the case, then I don't think April is therefore feasible. That risk has been pointed out to Torbay, but as I said, all the way along the line here, this is a two-stage process. I mean, somewhere along the line, we have to begin the process. If we don't, we won't get to the end of the process. But, if that period of due diligence, for whatever reason that we don't yet understand, throws up issues which take longer than we anticipate, then I'd have no hesitation in recommending to Council that date of the 1st of April should be postponed for whatever reason. But, I've got my crystal ball here. It's a little bit cloudy at the moment. Excuse me. Carol or Alison?
No, Tracy, do you want to say anything there?
I think what I'd absolutely echo that from our point of view, ensuring that the due diligence satisfies all of the issues you've raised and the things that you would expect us to be looking at in detail. If we need to look at a date that is a bit later, then if that emerges, that's what we would do. However, we have to balance that against the uncertainty in an authority who already are struggling with their rate of improvement, as well as actually the uncertainty here and how we get to a point in a timely way that has satisfied all of us that we're in a position to proceed. But I think we would not stick to that date if, as anything emerges, it takes longer to resolve.
So, not adding anything else to what's already been said, but putting it from the other perspective now. What we've been told very clearly is that children's services in Torbay and the children in Torbay deserve to have stability put in place and a sustainable system, and that it's gone on too long. And therefore the Commissioner and the Minister are both saying we want something to happen sooner rather than later. Now, clearly you've heard what our requirements are within that, but I think from the point of view of thinking of it from the children and young people's aspect, you can understand why there is a view that this needs to happen sooner rather than later. And when you read how long this has gone on, it's not acceptable. And therefore, they want something to happen quicker.
And I think one of the other things we have to do is make sure our communications team is pointing out very, very clearly that this is not going to adversely affect the children in Plymouth, and that this is us working with another authority to improve their services, but not at the detriment of ours. And that's got to be important. Yeah. Right.
No.
Who have we got? You got Councillor Tuffin.
Thank you, Chair. It's just raised. Tia has very properly explained how complex this whole situation is. So I think a recommendation I would be happy with is that the lawyer type elements of the contract, we get some independent advice, because I know how complex they are, and I won't pretend I understand them. So I think some independent advice would be helpful on that front.
We're going to take that as read, David, or you're happy that that's what you're going to be doing, is making sure that you're getting all the expert advice you need?
I was just going to reassure the panel. We certainly took independent advice when we were putting together our, what I would think is the more complicated funding arrangement with the CCG, but we did get external advice on that one. But it is in the costing model that we do get the right advice, yes.
Right.
If I may, Chair, I was actually talking about members having independent advice.
I'm advised.
A little bit more about what the issues are behind that, just so we can understand what.
Well, the complexity of it and understanding a contract. I think, you know, I recognise I'm a layperson, and I do need that independent advice to be assured that it's going to be a success.
I mean, our officers are here to give us independent advice. So I think perhaps we'll explore that as to what particularly you're asking, to make sure that it's within our officers' remit. But I think we'll flesh that out later. Now, throughout this session, Ross has been taking copious notes as to what recommendations we've pulled out of here. And I'm going to ask Ross now to read out what he's put together.
Thank you, Chair. As this is going to go to Council on Monday, as suggested recommendations are as follows. The committee advises Council to consider, during its debate of the 25th September 2017, the following. That Council should consider this as a contract arrangement rather than a strategic partnership. That Council seeks assurance that there will be no impact on the service delivery for children and young people in Plymouth. That Council seeks assurance that such an arrangement will in no way impact upon the improvement journey for Plymouth City Council Children and Young People Services. That Council seeks assurance that the resource requirements for the delivery of children's social care in Torbay is borne entirely by Torbay Council for the duration of the agreement, and that there will be no requirement for the pooling of budgets or cross-subsidy which impacts upon the people of Plymouth. That Torbay will provide access to their overall budget and financial planning process to ensure effective due diligence, and that decisions made in the medium term should be assessed to ensure they do not cause any unintended consequences for the delivery of children's services in Plymouth and Torbay. That's subject to, this was 6, recommendation 6. That's subject to agreement from all stakeholders for the contract arrangement, and this is 6A. The Department of Education will provide required funding for additional burdens that would be placed on both Torbay and Plymouth in the setting up of such an agreement, and that the contract will be developed at no cost to Plymouth City Council. Subject to a comprehensive risk register is developed and provided to all stakeholders, including the Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee, before any final decision is made. That clear lines of both management and political accountability across both local authorities is established for regulatory bodies such as Ofsted, and that Council is assured the reputational impact of serious incidents or negative judgments are contained to the relevant local authority. That Council seeks assurance that the required staffing structures will not impact negatively upon service delivery in Plymouth, and that clear controls are put in place for staffing arrangements across the two authorities, and that the arrangements improve the recruitment of social workers. Council must seek assurance that the senior management at Plymouth City Council have sufficient capacity given breadth of their current remit, and that all points as raised above are included in future reports to Wellbeing Overview and Scrutiny Committee, when considering the due diligence process, and that such reports should also provide clarity on the improvement currently underway in Torbay's children's services. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor MacDonald, you wanted to...
I know I've just been given a draft here, but on point 5, just to be reassured, that financial decisions in the medium term are duly assessed, because that would be an impact assessment in there. I've just got do not cause any unintended consequences. So I'm assuming it's another set of, yeah? And on point D, if I may, Chair, yes, it probably will improve the recruitment of social workers. There could be some opportunities there for the ambitious. But I would like something about our own social workers during this process, as I've just outlined. It's not necessarily, it's about reassurance. I don't know quite how you put that into council speak, but I'm looking for reassurance for perhaps...
Of what? Reassurance of
for our
what?
social workers out there on the front line.
Through you, Chair. Would something around consultation of staff and staff engagement suffice?
That there will be no detriment, perhaps, to the terms and conditions of social workers in this authority, or working practices. It can't make things worse for our workers that we're doing this. Yeah. It could be that we... Is it
in the impact overall, including for social workers and frontline staff?
Yes.
Yeah?
That would cover it.
If you added it in there.
I do think we need to be reassuring our staff as well as ourselves as councillors.
We can certainly add that in. Can I thank everybody for attending this morning, and we look forward to how this progresses. Obviously, Council on Monday will be interesting to see where that goes, and then we will look forward, and I think we probably will end up, it will mean extra sort of meetings, well, I say unfortunately, but, you know, I think our diaries will be having to make sure that we put these in. Alison, thank you very much indeed for all your efforts, because I'm aware that how much effort you've put into all of this and going to the groups to make sure that we've all been kept informed. So thank you. I know you've been very quiet this morning, but we do appreciate the efforts that have gone into it. Can I thank the committee, and we will meet again on this subject as needs be. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary.